At 2:17 a.m., a man in a car from 1979 stopped at my toll booth, paid me with a tarnished coin from the same year, and asked for a road that had been gone longer than I'd been alive. The cameras recorded my side of the conversation. They recorded the empty lane in front of me. They did not record him. That should have been enough to make me quit. It wasn't. The real mistake came later, when I started needing the road to explain itself. Back then, I still believed the booth was the safest place on the property. It was lit, enclosed, wired into cameras and lane sensors and gate controls. It was the one place where the job was supposed to stay simple. A car arrived. A rate was stated. Money changed hands. The arm lifted. The car moved on. That was the whole comfort of it. At that point in my life, comfort meant repetition. I was 34, recently divorced, recently unemployed, and tired in a way that had started to feel permanent. The warehouse contract I'd been living on vanished in March. My marriage had ended before that, though mostly on paper. In truth, it had died slowly. Over too many evenings of careful voices and exhausted silences, until the apartment felt less like a home than a waiting room. By the time the toll contractor called, I wasn't thinking about a future. I was thinking about rent, utilities, gas, groceries, and how long I could keep telling my mother I was fine before the lie started sounding insulting. The overnight differential mattered. The health insurance mattered. The fact they hired fast mattered. Everything else felt negotiable. The Western Connector sat far enough outside San Antonio that after midnight, it stopped feeling connected to the city at all. During the day, it looked like any other piece of expensive, unloved infrastructure in Texas. At night, it changed. Or maybe I did. Beyond the floodlights, there was nothing but fencing, low scrub, drainage cuts, and black land. The plaza itself, 2 staffed lanes, a few automated ones, a maintenance shed, and my little booth in the middle, looked less like a finished road and more like a checkpoint someone had placed in the wrong landscape. I learned the shift fast because you had to. Night work punishes hesitation. Truckers came through with folded bills and dead eyes. Oilfield pickups moved in dusty groups. Hospital workers looked detached from the hour. Deputies either nodded or stared too long. Drunks were obvious because they spoke too carefully. Tourists almost never came that far out after midnight. The booth became its own small world. I learned every sound it made. The printer chirp, the relay click, the hum of the monitors, the fan cage rattling above me. Even the difference between the way irritated people dropped coins into the tray and the way nervous people did. Solitary work teaches your body the local language of machines until they start feeling steadier than people. That first impossible night had been slow enough to make me restless. No weather, no accidents, no road work, just heat, stretched over miles of dark land and the low hum of things pretending to be permanent. I had just cleared a plate reader fault from a delivery van when I looked up at the approach monitor and saw an old blue Ford already entering the booth lights with no headlights on. Not approaching, not rolling in from the dark, already there. The car stopped at the line. The driver looked at me and he didn't look lost. He looked at me like I had moved the road. I pressed the microphone switch. "Sir, you need your headlights on." He didn't answer. His window was already halfway down. Pale face, gray suit coat, shirt buttoned to the throat despite the heat, hair combed flat against his scalp. Both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, like a man obeying rules learned long before I was born. "Sir?" Then he turned his head. Is this the road to Del Rio? His voice sounded wrong in a way I couldn't explain then. Not louder or softer than it should have been. Just slightly farther away, as though the sound had crossed more distance than the open window allowed. No, sir, I said. You're headed east? He stared at me. That can't be right. Then he placed a coin in the tray. I picked it up. Tarnished silver, half-dollar size, dark around the rim. The date stamped on it was 1979. I need current payment, I said. Cash is fine. He kept looking at me. I already paid this road. My first thought was dementia. My second was alcohol. My third came without permission and stayed longer than the others. The right shoulder of his coat was darker than the rest, as though it had once been soaked through and dried badly. You can turn around at the crossover up ahead, I said. You're going the wrong direction. I've never seen this road before, he said. It wasn't here. That should have sounded absurd. Instead, because of the way he said it, it sounded offended. Things change, I said. Something in his face tightened. No, he said quietly. Not like that. Then he handed me a driver's license. The photograph matched him. Richard Vaughn. Born 1928. License expiration 1983. I stared too long. That won't scan, I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me with tired annoyance. I don't need it to scan. I need you to tell me where I am. I looked into the back seat. A folded blanket. Nothing else. No smell of alcohol, no cigarettes. Almost no smell at all, just a faint mineral scent, like rainwater gone cold in the dark. It hadn't rained in weeks. This is State Route 211, I said. Behar County, Texas. He stared at me while something behind his eyes rejected the information in real time. No, he said again. Then a horn sounded behind him, and I nearly jumped. A white pickup was suddenly idling in the lane behind the Ford. I am still certain it had not been there a second earlier. The approach road was straight for half a mile. I watched it constantly. But there it was now. Headlights washing over the Ford's trunk. Richard Vaughn didn't react to the horn. Sir, I need you to move forward. He took back his license, closed the wallet, and placed the tarnished coin in the tray one last time. I paid. Then he drove off. No burst of acceleration, no taillights. He just moved beyond the booth lights and disappeared into the dark as if the road had taken him without effort. I collected the toll from the pickup behind him. The driver squinted at me and asked whether I was okay. I said yes, because at that point I still believed there had to be an ordinary explanation waiting for me if I just kept moving. Then the lane cleared, and I checked the cameras. So the Ford wasn't there. Not on the approach feed, not on the overhead angle, not on the downstream camera. The footage showed the white pickup rolling toward a booth where I was leaning forward, talking to empty air. And the only proof the encounter had happened was the coin still sitting in the tray. I put it in the cash drawer and finished the shift anyway. That tells you what sort of man I was then. Not brave, not skeptical, just tired enough to treat impossible things like workplace irregularities as long as they didn't stop the shift from ending on time. At dawn, Neil came in with coffee and asked how the night had gone. Slow, I said. Then, because exhaustion makes honesty slip past pride, I added, I had a weird one around 2. He looked up. Weird how? I told him most of it, though not all. I left out the missing footage. I left out the expired license. I was still trying to make the story sound like something an office could absorb. Then I showed him the coin. He took it from me, turned it once under the fluorescent light, and for a moment his face changed. Only slightly. Just enough for me to notice. Sometimes on overnights, he said, you get more tired than you realize. I wasn't asleep. I didn't say you were. He slipped the coin into his shirt pocket. Go home, get some rest. Don't hold on to every oddball who comes through here. The thing that bothered me wasn't that he dismissed me. It was that the dismissal sounded practiced. 3 nights later, the second driver came through, and that was when I stopped trying to explain the first one away. Her car was a cream-colored Buick LeSabre. One taillight out. Rear windshield held together by old repair tape that flashed silver under the floodlights. She approached slowly enough that I assumed she was exhausted or unfamiliar with the road. The OCR reader pulled her plate. Instead of owner information, I got a red box. Record retired. I had never seen that status before. The Buick stopped. The woman behind the wheel rolled down her window. She looked early 40s, brown skin, dark hair tied back in a scarf, white waitress blouse buttoned at the wrists despite the heat. A name tag pinned upside down on her chest. She smiled at me with the exhausted politeness of someone used to ending long shifts by making strangers comfortable. How much? She asked. $3.25. She counted out $3.25 into the tray. Need another 10 cents. She looked at the money, then at me. That's what it costs. It's $3.25. It was $3.15 yesterday. It was Wednesday. I only work Sundays, she said. Yesterday was Sunday? She took off the upside-down name tag, turned it around, and pinned it back on. Linda. Underneath, smaller. Las Palmas Cafe. You got another dime? I asked. She smiled apologetically. Not till I cash out. I should have lifted the gate and let her through. Instead, because Richard Vaughn had gotten into my head, and the red status box on the screen felt like a challenge, I asked the worst possible question. What year is it, Linda? Her expression changed instantly. Not anger, not suspicion. She looked embarrassed for me. 1978, she said gently. Honey, are you all right? The lane system refused to clear. Record retired stayed on the screen. Then the radio on my desk crackled, and a man's voice said, Let her through. I grabbed the microphone. Who is this? No answer. Linda flinched, as though she had heard it too. Then her face seemed to thin somehow, not blank exactly, but less fully there. I raised the gate. She drove forward. This time the camera saw her. I watched the downstream feed as the Buick moved away, one good taillight glowing red in the dark. At the edge of the lit roadway where the frame gave way to blackness, the image tore sideways into static for half a second. When it corrected, the lane was empty, not too far away to resolve. Empty. I called Neil immediately. When I told him everything, the red OCR status, the year, the radio voice, the disappearance, he stayed quiet long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. And then he said, write it up as equipment malfunction and customer interaction. What? If you put the rest in a report, what do you think happens next? What's going on out here? Nothing you can fix from the booth. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting at 3:50 in the morning. Then after a pause that made something cold move under my ribs, he said, Do not speak to them more than you have to. Them? The line went dead. I didn't sleep the next day. I went home and started digging. Before the toll connector existed, that corridor had been a patchwork of county roads, state proposals, land disputes, flood detours, service cuts, bridge replacements, and right-of-way fights spread across decades. Old maps contradicted new ones. Survey lines overlapped routes that had been renamed, abandoned, or erased. The corridor looked less like planning than an argument. I searched Richard Vaughan first, a local paper archive from 1979, flash flood west of Castroville. 3 vehicles washed off a low water crossing after midnight. 1 body recovered, 2 missing. One of the missing was Richard Vaughan, 51, driving from Del Rio toward San Antonio. Then I searched Las Palmas Cafe. That took longer. Restaurants vanished quietly. But I found an opening notice from 1978. Then a later item about a late-night collision involving a cream-colored Buick and a cattle truck on an older county road. Driver deceased at scene Melinda Garcia, employee of Las Palmas Cafe, returning home after closing. I sat in my apartment kitchen staring at the clippings while the refrigerator hummed. Chaos leaves room for denial. Pattern doesn't. That night I slept maybe 40 minutes before waking because I thought I heard coins striking metal. I sat on the edge of the bed listening. Silence. Then, faintly from the kitchen, a soft, metallic click. I walked barefoot across the apartment and found nothing except the cheap glass bowl by the sink where I'd emptied my pockets earlier. Inside it, beneath my keys and a grocery receipt, lay the tarnished 1979 coin. I know I had not brought it home. I know. Neil had taken it. I stood there for almost a minute before touching it. It was much colder than the room. The next morning I took it to work and set it in the tray before Neil arrived. When he came in, he saw it immediately. For the first time since I had known him, he looked genuinely unsettled. "You kept that?" "I didn't take it home," I said. He said nothing, just picked it up and slipped it into his shirt pocket again. That was when I understood something worse than disbelief. Neil knew enough to be afraid. When I came back the following night, there was a yellow sticky note on the shelf beneath the register. Keep interactions brief, no questions unrelated to toll collection. If a vehicle does not trigger normal processing, raise gate manually and document time only. That note frightened me more than either driver had. Because it meant there were procedures, and procedures mean history. Behind the booth, there was a cramped operations room with cleaning supplies, spare batteries, receipt rolls, and an old gray filing cabinet with a broken lock. I had passed it every shift without thinking much about it. That morning after Neil's note, I opened the bottom drawer. 3 folders: camera errors, plate red, failures, night exceptions. I took out night exceptions first. The reports went back more than a decade. Not constant, not common enough to become rumor, but steady enough to prove the problem had roots. A dark sedan entering a lane with no approach footage. A driver presenting outdated county paperwork and asking for a route no longer in service. An old patrol car. A utility truck with a retired company logo. A school bus with obsolete district markings. A woman asking for a bridge that had been replaced before I was born. Different details. Same problem. Every report that stayed short and procedural ended cleanly enough to file. Every report where the collector asked extra questions got worse. Power fluctuations, radio interference, lane faults, camera drift, occupancy errors, mutual confusion. There was a county memo from the late 90s written in the flat, cowardly voice of institutions trying to force the impossible into acceptable language. Personnel assigned to overnight collection or observation on the western segment are advised not to prolong interactions with anomalous motorists. Events correlate with former alignments and historical incidents within the acquisition corridor. There's no evidence of physical threat when contact remains transactional. Personnel are not to pursue, follow, or attempt interdiction. There is no evidence of physical threat when contact remains transactional. That line held every warning it was too afraid to write clearly. A name appeared again and again in the margins of several reports. Aubrey Fisk, usually underlined. One 2007 sheet described a driver asking for a route that hadn't existed in years. At the bottom, in another hand, someone had written, "Fisk continues to theorize, advised again not to theorize in reports." In any other room, that line would have been funny. In there, it felt like a prayer against curiosity. Neil found me in the file room at dawn. "How long have you been in that cabinet?" he asked. Who was Aubrey Fisk? Something in his face hardened. "Go home." "No." He set down his coffee. "There are two bad ways to do this job out here. One is to panic. The other is to get interested. I'm already interested." "That's not something to be proud of." "Then tell me what this is." He stared at me long enough that I thought he might leave without answering. Then he said, "Some nights, people come through that booth in vehicles tied to roads that don't exist anymore. If you keep it brief, they move on. If you don't, they start trying to place themselves. And if they do," he looked at me more carefully than he ever had before, "they start noticing things." "Like what?" "Like you." I laughed once, because the sentence sounded impossible in that cramped fluorescent room full of receipt rolls and cheap cleaning spray. "Who was Aubrey Fisk?" Neil rubbed a hand over his beard. "He worked nights on this segment before me, smart guy. Thought he could map the pattern. Understand where they came from, maybe stop it. What happened to him? He drove through his own lane one night at 2 in the morning and never showed up on the downstream camera. And I stared at him. "You're serious?" "Yes." "And everyone just accepts that?" "No," he said, "it's contained." Then he told me the part that never really left me. They keep the booth staffed because once you leave the lane unattended, they stop lining up here. I didn't understand. Then he added, "They start taking people with them." I wish I could tell you that made me quit. Instead, it gave the thing shape. And once something has shape, curiosity starts mistaking itself for responsibility. For the next week, I tried to behave. No names, no dates, no extra questions. If the payment worked, I took it. If the system glitched, I lifted the arm manually and documented the time. I kept my side of the exchange small and mechanical. It almost worked. An old tractor rattled through one night, driven by a man in overalls who asked where the cattle pens had gone. I said only, "You're clear." He tipped 2 fingers from the wheel and continued into the dark. A deputy cruiser with an outdated paint scheme stopped at the line. The officer inside held up a temporary county placard and stared straight ahead. I raised the gate. He passed through. The downstream camera lost him at the edge of the frame. A station wagon arrived with a husband, wife, and 2 children asleep in the back seat. They looked so ordinary that for a second I forgot to be afraid. The father placed a county fair voucher in the tray. I took it, raised the arm, and sent them through. Their taillights vanished too early, like the last piece of road had simply failed to hold them. That family bothered me more than the others, because nothing about them looked supernatural. They were just people in transit, carrying weariness, private plans, and the assumption that the road would do what roads are for. The road had failed them as completely as it had failed Richard Vaughn. That was when I started keeping notes at home, even though I knew I shouldn't. Times, weather, direction of travel, flood crossings, route names, old county overlays. I told myself I was only being systematic. What I was actually doing was making myself easier to read. Then, 4 nights after the family in the station wagon, the girl in the green Thunderbird arrived. She came through at 2:03 a.m. The car was a dark green Thunderbird from the mid-60s, better kept than most of the old vehicles I had seen. She looked about 20, maybe younger. Her eyes were red, but she held herself with the rigid control of someone trying very hard not to lose composure in front of a stranger. "Can you tell me if my brother came through here?" she asked. That was new. Until then, none of them had asked after anyone else. "What vehicle is he in?" I asked before I could stop myself. "A black truck. He was behind me at the river crossing. Then I lost him." Her voice was steady only because she was forcing it to be. "What's your brother's name?" The moment I asked, I knew I had made a mistake. Hope entered her face too fast. "Tommy," she said. "Did he come through?" I should have said I didn't know. I should have raised the gate. Instead, I hesitated. "You should be able to tell," she said softly, glancing at the monitors. "You have everything right there. I can't check by name." Her expression tightened. Then she asked, "What year is it?" That hit me harder than anything Richard or Linda had said because now the confusion had turned around. She was using me to measure the edges of her own reality. Neil's voice snapped through the radio before I could answer. "Do not answer. Too late. 2025, I said. She laughed once, a short broken sound. Then the lane jammed. Occupied. Reset failed. Manual override locked halfway. The floor shuddered under my feet. Not metaphorically. Physically. The west approach floodlights went out all at once. The darkness beyond the booth became absolute. And in that darkness, directly behind the Thunderbird, a black pickup was idling. It had not approached. It had not appeared on camera. It was simply there. Long hood. Dull black paint. Grill bent inward as if it had struck something hard. A young man sat behind the wheel, gripping it so hard his knuckles were white. His mouth was open, calling something I couldn't hear. The girl whispered, "Tommy." She opened her door halfway as if she meant to run to him. Neil's voice came through the radio, edged with fear. "Do not leave the booth." The half-raised arm began lowering on its own. The girl shoved the Thunderbird forward, trying to beat it. For 1 second, her window aligned with the pickups. I saw Tommy's face clearly. Young, terrified. Looking not at her, but somehow through her, as if the space between them wasn't one the lane could solve. The arm slammed down. The power snapped back. The floodlights returned. Both vehicles were gone. After that, quitting stopped feeling simple. If the road had only frightened me, I think I would have walked away. But by then, I had seen enough to suspect the booth was doing more than collecting money. It was forcing arrival into some manageable order. 1 driver, 1 exchange, 1 release. The question was, how much? Neil made me meet him at a county annex office on my day off. The place smelled like old carpet, copier toner, and records. Nobody wanted until something had already gone wrong. A silver-haired woman waited for us in a back office, lined with rolled maps and photocopied clippings. "This is Darlene Fisk," Neil said. "Aubrey Fisk's ex-wife. She studied my face for a few seconds, then said, "You've seen one that looked like you." At that point, I had not. That sentence chilled me anyway. According to Darlene, Aubrey had become convinced the road events were not simple hauntings and not random dead returning. He thought they were failed journeys, people pinned to unfinished movement in ground. Humans had repeatedly redrawn without ever fully settling. Roads promised passage. Floods, collisions, detours, abandoned alignments, service cuts, bridge replacements, right-of-way fights. Enough broken routes in one corridor, and maybe the movement never ended cleanly. It sounded abstract. Unfortunately, it also sounded possible. Aubrey thought the booth mattered, Darlene said. Not because it took money, because it forced a rival into something stable. Did it help him? I asked. For the first time, something changed in her face. It let him last longer than he should have, she said. Neil wanted me transferred. Days, different segment, less isolation. Darlene looked less certain that transfer would solve anything. Neither of them said why directly. I wish I had listened to the fear instead of the curiosity. 5 nights later, the Silver Crown Victoria rolled out of the westbound mist. Most of the impossible traffic came eastbound. That mattered because the westbound sedan already felt wrong before I even saw who was driving it. A pale mist had started gathering over the lane just before 2. Not weather, not ground fog. It looked like the road itself was losing edges. At exactly 2 a.m., a Silver Crown Victoria emerged from it and stopped at the line. Mid-2000s model, fleet color, black steel wheels. The driver was me. Not something like me. Not a resemblance. Me. Same nose broken once in high school and never set quite straight. Same widow's peak. Same cheap blue work shirt with the company patch over the chest. Same hands. Only older. Not by 10 years. Maybe 1, maybe 2. Enough to make him look worn down in a way I recognized immediately and hated. He placed an old county toll ticket in the tray. "Don't follow the west frontage after the old culvert," he said. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. "Who are you?" He looked at me with tired irritation. "You already know." "No?" "Yes." Behind him, the westbound lane had become almost featureless inside the mist. No painted line, no true depth, just the suggestion of a route. "If you keep writing it down," he said, "it starts writing back." I didn't understand that fully then, but I understood enough to be afraid. "What happens if I quit?" I asked. He looked at me with such open bitterness that I almost stepped back from the glass. "You think I didn't try that?" Then every monitor in the booth flickered at once. For a second, they all showed the same image. The westbound lane, mist, empty road, and a dark shape standing farther out than the floodlights should have allowed to exist. The older version of me glanced at his side mirror. For the first time, fear crossed his face. "You waited too long," he said. "Raise the gate now." I hit the release. The arm lifted. He accelerated through and vanished into the mist, as if the road had folded around him. The ticket remained behind. On the back, written in pencil, were 3 words. "Don't take shift." Neil arrived before sunrise, looking as if he had dressed in the dark. I showed him the ticket. "He was warning me," I said. Neil stared through the booth glass toward the westbound lane. "No," he said quietly. He was late. That evening, every westbound downstream camera failed at once. No static, no distortion, hard black. Neil shut the segment for maintenance and told me not to come in. At 2:11 a.m., my phone rang from an unknown number. When I answered, my own voice said, If you don't come now, she'll use the empty lane. Then the call disconnected. Every decent decision in my life would have started by refusing that call. Instead, I drove west. The segment was mostly dark when I arrived. Emergency lighting only. No public traffic. No maintenance crew. No Neil. My key still opened the booth. Inside, the air was colder than I had ever felt it. Not air conditioning cold, pipe cold, basement cold. The county map from the Crown Victoria lay open on the counter, marked towards something west of the active road called Hargrove Culvert. Beside it was a note in my handwriting. You'll think it's bait. It is. Go anyway. I knew it was my handwriting. That was the worst part. Beyond the booth, 50 yards down the westbound lane, Linda's cream-colored Buick was idling. She was turned toward the passenger seat, smiling at someone I couldn't see. Then she looked up, saw me in the booth, and pointed west. Behind her, deeper in the dark, more headlights waited. Then more behind those. Different heights, different spacing, different decades, if headlight shape can carry time. That was the moment I finally understood what Neil meant when he said the booth contained them. It wasn't just collecting tolls. It was giving shape to arrival. Without a live operator, the unresolved traffic accumulated. I took the map and drove the west frontage road. It was barely a road at all. More maintenance strip than travel route, gravel and drainage cuts and narrow service gates, threading through low ground no sane person would use at night. The farther I went, the less it felt like something meant for ordinary traffic. My phone lost signal within minutes. Twice I thought I had reached a dead end. Twice the headlights found more gravel at the last second, as if the path were being invented just ahead of me. Then I saw taillights. The silver Crown Victoria sat on the shoulder with the driver's door open and the interior light on. No one inside. Beyond it, the frontage ended at an old culvert under a low embankment. Concrete ring, dry ditch, weeds. Nothing visually remarkable except the darkness inside. It had structure. Not just depth, structured darkness, distance arranged inside a space that should not have held it. My flashlight beam reached maybe 12 feet before it began to look weak and uncertain. And then I heard engines. Not one, many. Idle, brake squeal, fan belts, tire hiss, diesel knock. Different eras of mechanical sound layered together at different distances. Headlights bloomed inside the culvert. The green Thunderbird emerged first, then Tommy's black pickup, then Linda's Buick, then Richard Vaughn's Ford, then the tractor, then the family station wagon, then more behind them, more than I could count before panic made counting feel useless. They were not coming for me. That was the terrible part. They were simply using the empty route. And if the booth remained unsupervised, they would feed into the active road network without any human point of recognition to reduce the encounter into something survivable. I ran back to the Crown Victoria. On the passenger seat in my handwriting was another note. Only the arm counts. I drove back toward the booth with the impossible convoy forming behind me in patient silence. By the time I reached the plaza, the green Thunderbird was already entering the outer floodlights. The central lane was the only one I could still operate manually. The automated lanes were active enough to fail, but not active enough to trust. I dragged the maintenance crank to the old arm and forced it down to chest height, enough to stop the lead vehicle and make the line face the booth. The Thunderbird halted. The girl looked at me through the glass. Not crying now. Not panicked. Resolved. I stepped into the booth, picked up the microphone, and heard my own voice come out smaller than I wanted. Payment. The word called something back into her. She reached into her purse with shaking fingers and placed a folded bill in the tray. I took it. Then I raised the arm just enough. She drove through. The instant her rear bumper cleared it, Tommy's pickup rolled forward. He saw her taillights beyond the booth. For one impossible second, relief crossed his face. Then he followed. One by one, they came. Linda gave me $3.25 again. I didn't ask for the missing dime. Richard Vaughn laid the tarnished 1979 coin in the tray. I accepted it and raised the arm. The tractor driver tipped 2 fingers from the wheel. The father in the station wagon handed me a county fair voucher. He nodded at me with tired gratitude that made my stomach turn. Then came others. A utility truck with county markings no longer used. A city bus on a route abandoned years earlier. A motorcycle with one weak headlamp. A woman in hospital scrubs from an outdated design. A man in a service uniform asking why the signs had changed. A sedan with a wedding veil folded across the back seat. A survey truck with rolled plats behind the seat and a man too tired to be afraid. None of them were monstrous. That was what made it worse. They looked like people who had trusted a route and never stopped trying to finish using it. The line went on for hours. Payment. Arm. Forward. No names. No dates. No corrections. At some point, I understood the booth was not sending them where they belonged. It was giving them a way to keep moving without colliding directly with the living world. The distinction mattered. It did not comfort me. The last vehicle in the line was the Silver Crown Victoria. My older self stopped at the tray. The marked county map sat on his passenger seat. Neither of us spoke. He placed the map in the tray. I took it. For the first time, his expression softened. Not relief, pity. Then he drove through and vanished before the downstream cameras came back online. Neil found me at sunrise, still working the booth. Not with impossible traffic, with ordinary commuters, construction pickups, tag users, a woman in scrubs, a man in a polo shirt arguing with his Bluetooth headset. Real daylight traffic, real engines from the correct decade, receipt, change, gate, receipt, change, gate. Neil stood outside the booth for a few seconds watching me before he came in. He said my name twice before I heard him. He sent me home. By the end of the week, I had been transferred to the East segment. That should have solved it. For a while, I almost believed it had. Daylight helps. Busy lanes help. Human impatience helps more than you'd think. There is something deeply reassuring about ordinary irritated people. People tapping the wheel because the line is slow. People asking for receipts for reimbursement. People already forgetting your face while they're still looking at it. For several months, I let myself believe the Western segment had only broken something in me temporarily, and that routine could sand the damage smooth. Then, one bright afternoon, a man in a county utility truck rolled up to my booth and handed me exact change from 1986. "Bridge repairs done yet?" he asked. There were 3 modern SUVs behind him, and a woman on her phone in the next lane. No one else noticed anything wrong. I raised the gate and let him through. After that, the incidents followed me. Not every shift, not every week, but often enough to prove the pattern had either attached itself to me or learned where I would be. A state route north of town where an old ambulance came through without valid registration and vanished between camera frames. A swing shift where a school bus from the wrong decade tripped the lane sensor without appearing on the overhead feed. A private plaza south of town where a woman in a rain-darkened coat asked for a subdivision that had never been built. A day shift where a survey truck driver handed me a yellowed plat from 1989 and asked with real hope in his face, "Which line are we calling it now?" That was the day I stopped pretending distance mattered. I changed how I worked. No names. No years. No theories. No notes. That last one was hardest. Human beings reach for explanation the way drowning people reach for edges. It makes them feel as though survival is a choice. But explanation changed the encounters. The more I tried to understand, the closer the road seemed to come. The older version of me had been right. Once you write it down, it starts writing back. I tested that truth twice. The first time I scribbled a driver description on a napkin during break because the man had asked for a county bridge gone for decades. Later that morning, I saw his truck parked under a dead street light near my apartment complex. Empty. No plates. Engine cold. The second time, I unfolded the map the older me had left and traced the overlays between flood crossings, service cuts, bridge sites, and abandoned alignments. 3 nights later, my phone rang at 2:17 a.m., and all I heard on the line was distant traffic and the chirp of my own booth printer. I burned the map after that. The paper went. The routes remained in my head. Nearly a year passed before Neil called me again. I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store with the air conditioner dying in stages when his name lit up my phone. "Won't need a favor," he said. "No." He laughed once, not because it was funny, because the answer was exactly what he expected. "Listen, I'm not going back to the West segment." "Neither am I," he said. "I quit 3 weeks ago." That got my attention. "Then why are you calling?" "Because the contractor thinks the Western incidents are folklore dressed up as maintenance issues. They're moving to partial overnight automation to cut labor. They've got a new kid on swing coverage who doesn't know anything except lane basics." I knew, before he said anything else, that I was going to hate whatever came next. "I shouldn't be calling you," Neil said. "But if they leave that segment thin overnight, somebody's going to get hurt." Call County records. Did. No authority over staffing. Darlene? She said you wouldn't refuse if I was honest. I hated hearing that because it was probably true. There's a specific kind of lie people tell themselves when they go back toward danger for practical reasons. It lets them keep their self-respect. I told myself I was going back because a new employee was vulnerable. I told myself I understood the procedure better than anyone still working that corridor. Those things were partly true. The uglier truth was that some part of me wanted to know whether the Western segment still recognized me. The new guy's name was Aaron. Mid-20s, thin beard, security job posture. Polite in the way people are when they still believe procedures exist because somebody wiser designed them. "Appreciate you covering," he said. "They told me this segment's dead overnight." "It usually is," I said. That was the last easy lie I told that week. I didn't explain everything because there is no useful way to explain impossible traffic to somebody who hasn't seen it. Too much and you sound insane. Too little and you sound cruel. So I gave him the only rules that mattered. Keep interactions brief. If the lane system fails, raise the gate manually. Do not answer questions unrelated to toll collection. Do not leave the booth during an anomalous stop. He stared at me. Anomalous stop? You'll know it if you get one. He didn't like that answer. Unfortunately, it was accurate. The first night stayed quiet until 1:40 a.m. Then, an old delivery truck came through with obsolete company branding and a driver who paid with a paper fuel chit from a firm that had merged out of existence years earlier. I took it, raised the gate, sent him through. Aaron waited until the truck disappeared into the downstream dark. "Okay," he said, "that was weird. Now you know." He wanted more, and I gave him nothing. The second night was worse from the start. No wind, no insects, no coyote noise in the distance. Just booth fan, radio hum, monitors, and the feeling that the road had already started listening before anything arrived. At 1:53 a.m., Aaron asked whether I smelled rain. I did. The sky was clear. At 1:58, the westbound approach camera developed a delay of nearly 2 seconds. At 2 o'clock exactly, the lane speaker crackled without input. At 2:01, the silver Crown Victoria rolled out of the westbound dark and stopped at the line. The driver was not obviously me this time, at least not at first. Male, similar build, similar age, face partly in shadow. When he leaned toward the window, I saw enough resemblance to make my throat tighten anyway. He placed an old county toll ticket in the tray and looked not at me, but at Aaron. "How long you been working here?" That was new. I stepped between them. "Payment accepted. You're clear." His eyes shifted to me. Recognition flashed there, and something like disappointment. "He shouldn't stay," the driver said. Aaron laughed nervously. "Okay." I hit the release. Nothing happened. The driver looked past us toward the west approach, and for the first time I saw real fear on his face. "He's early?" Every monitor in the booth flickered to static, then returned, showing the westbound lane from impossible angles, positions our cameras did not occupy. One low to the ground, one far overhead, one facing the booth from somewhere beyond the floodlights. Aaron swore. The lane speaker hissed, then filled with layered traffic sound. The driver in the Crown Victoria said, "Do not let him answer if they ask the year." "Who?" Aaron said. The west floodlights went out. Behind the Crown Victoria, headlights filled the darkness. Not approaching, waiting. That was enough for me. I grabbed the manual crank and told Aaron, "Inside now." To his credit, he obeyed. The Crown Victoria driver looked at me one last time. "You know how this works," he said. Then he drove through before the gate had fully cleared. Behind him, the line began moving. Working the line with Aaron beside me was worse than doing it alone the first time. Not because the vehicles were more frightening, because now I had to watch understanding fail in someone else's face. The first car was a dark station wagon with 2 sleeping children in the back. The father handed over folded bills from the wrong decade. I took them, lifted the gate, sent them through. Aaron whispered, "They look normal." "They are," I said before I could stop myself. Then I corrected it. Or were. Next came a utility worker asking whether the county line bridge had reopened. Then a deputy cruiser from an outdated paint scheme. Then a woman in hospital scrubs from a long discontinued design. Then a farm truck carrying feed sacks older than they should have looked. Aaron started asking the wrong questions. What happens if they hit real traffic? I don't know. Are they dead? I don't know. Do they know? Stop. That last word came out sharper than I intended. The next driver reached the tray, a city bus driver in an old route uniform. He looked directly at Aaron. What did he say? The lane lights dimmed. I closed my eyes for 1 second. When I opened them, every driver in the visible line was looking at the booth more directly than before, not just at the tray, at us. Wrong. Attention was wrong. Questions were wrong. The radio clicked alive. Neil's voice came through thin and distant enough that I couldn't tell whether it was really Neil or just something the corridor had learned to imitate. Keep it moving. I looked at Aaron. Stay away from the glass. Don't answer anything. Then I worked faster. Payment. Gate. Forward. Payment. Gate. Forward. The line stabilized. By 4:10, it had thinned. By 4:40, the floodlights returned fully. By 5 o'clock, the approach camera had corrected. At dawn, Aaron sat on the operations room floor with both hands over his face. When he finally looked up, he said, "I'm not coming back." I nodded. "Good. You are?" I didn't answer, because by then something had become clear in a way I didn't want to admit. The Western segment didn't merely have a road problem. It had a staffing problem, not in the corporate sense, in the structural sense. It needed people who knew how to keep the encounter small-dar. Aaron quit. The contractor, predictably, treated his resignation as proof that overnight human staffing was unstable and too expensive. Their answer was more automation, more remote monitoring, fewer live operators, and exactly the kind of confidence that always looks solid right before it breaks something essential. For 2 months, I heard almost nothing about the Western segment. That silence didn't comfort me. Then Darlene called. "Come to the annex." Her office looked the same, except for a fresh stack of incident sheets on her desk. Unmanned overnight lane. Gate lifts with no recorded trigger. Vehicles detected downstream without upstream footage. Local reports of cars appearing briefly on frontage roads where no public access existed. One minor collision with an abandoned trailer, no one could explain. "No fatalities yet?" Darlene said. "Yet?" She removed her glasses. "The booth isn't holding shape long enough. What do you want me to do?" "Aubrey believed there was a recurrent seam west of Hargrove Culvert," she said. "He thought if the plaza could be forced into a single live route, one arm, one tray, one operator, it might reduce spillover." That sounds like a prayer. Most county planning is prayer with maps. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked the question I had been avoiding for months. "Why me?" Darlene met my eyes. "Because you've already been accepted." That sentence stayed with me all the way home. Not chosen, not cursed, accepted, used, available. At 2:17 a.m. my phone rang. Unknown number. When I answered, my own voice said, "You can either be staff or traffic." Then the line went dead. I didn't sleep after that. By noon, I had called Neil. "I got the call," I said. "So did I." "Did you ever figure out what it wants?" He made a tired sound. "Don't use that word." "What word?" "Want." He was right. Want implied personality. This thing behaved more like pressure, looking for a shape to move through. "What is it then?" I asked. The line stayed quiet for a long time. Finally, Neil said, "A lane with a labor shortage." That evening I drove west. The plaza was dark when I arrived. Not fully dark. Emergency indicators still glowed. Some overhead lights still worked. But the place had the hollow feel of infrastructure running without witnesses. I parked outside the maintenance gate and walked in carrying a flashlight, a tool bag, and the old metal crank. Inside the booth, the console was alive enough to display faults. Downstream occupancy error, lane desync, Camera unavailable. Event buffer full. The printer tray was empty. When I touched it, it was warm. That bothered me more than the fault messages. Warm implied recent use. My plan, if it deserved the word, was brutally simple. Reduce the pathways. Force all usable flow into a single live lane. One active route. One tray. One arm. One operator. I worked for nearly an hour. Powered down 2 side lanes. Locked another gate in the down position. Disabled a maintenance turnout that had been feeding ghost occupancy into the system. Redirected what control I still had to the old central lane. At 1:56 a.m., the radio crackled to life on its own. No voice, just distant traffic. At 1:59, the westbound camera came back online by itself. Mist filled the lane. At 2 a.m., the Silver Crown Victoria sat waiting at the line. The driver was me again. Older again, not dramatically, just enough. I pressed the mic. I'm closing the side lanes. He nodded once. Good. That enough? No? Then why do it? Because enough isn't the same as necessary. That sounded irritatingly like something I might say after too many years in bad systems. What happens if I stay? I asked. He looked at me for a long time. Nothing dramatic. That frightened me more than a threat would have. What does that mean? It means you keep learning the shifts. You keep moving them through. You stop asking where they go afterward because it wastes time. Something close to disgust steadied me. You're not me. His mouth twitched. Keep telling yourself that if it helps. He placed a folded paper in the tray. I opened it after he passed through. A list in my handwriting. 1 active lane. No names, no years, and no maps. No pursuit. No. Do not let traffic stack outside the booth. At the bottom, 1 final line. If the arm fails, become the arm. That night the line began at 2:04 a.m. Not gradually. One moment there was only mist. The next, headlights were layered in the westbound dark. The lead vehicle already at the tray. I worked the central lane alone for hours. A woman in a diner uniform asked whether the bridge by the feed store was still washed out. A man in a highway truck wanted to know why the signs had changed. A family in a station wagon argued softly about whether they were already too late. A deputy in an obsolete cruiser held up a temporary placard and stared straight ahead. A city bus driver sat with both hands fixed on the wheel as though letting go would make the route disappear. A man in a suit coat, damp at one shoulder, said, "I paid this road already." A surveyor handed me a folded plat and asked, "Which line are we calling the boundary now?" A woman with a wedding veil folded across the back seat asked whether the church road still crossed the creek. I took what they gave me, raised the arm, moved them through. At 2:47, the manual crank jammed. The next driver, a nurse from some earlier decade, looked at me and asked, "What year is it?" I didn't answer. The arm refused to rise. Headlights stacked behind her. That was when the last line of the note became literal. I stepped out of the booth, raised one hand. "Payment." She blinked, then placed 2 folded bills in my palm. The line steadied. I waved her through. The next vehicle advanced, then the next, then the next. At some point, the booth stopped mattering more than I did. That sentence should horrify you. It horrifies me now. But when you spend enough time inside a system, the role migrates to the nearest stable operator. For those hours, I became a human toll arm. Hand out, exchange, step aside, wave through. The line responded, not emotionally, procedurally. Richard Vaughn stopped and stared at my face, as though he were on the edge of understanding something. Linda said, "You look tired, honey," with the same weary kindness she had shown the first time. Tommy's pickup followed the green Thunderbird with grim patience. A sedan with a sleeping child in the back paused too long because the mother couldn't stop looking at me, as if she almost recognized something she didn't want to know. A floral dress woman with broken mascara handed me exact change and whispered, "He was right behind me." A sheriff's deputy with a split lip and dented light bar never took his eyes off the road ahead. Each interaction threatened to become more than an exchange. Each time I forced it smaller. Payment, clear, move forward. By dawn, the line had thinned. The final vehicle was the Silver Crown Victoria. This time my older self stepped out and walked toward me from the edge of the light. No car between us, no glass, just him. "You can leave after dawn," he said. "What happens if I do?" "You come back later." "What happens if I don't?" He looked toward the dimming line behind him. "You already know. Is there ever an end to this?" He didn't smile. "Not the kind you want." Then he was gone. At dawn, real traffic returned. That was one of the first patterns I learned, and one of the few that never changed. Daylight didn't solve the problem, but it thinned it. The sky brightened from black to iron to gray. The floodlights lost authority. The cameras stopped stuttering. The controls resumed behaving like hardware instead of negotiators. And into that transition came ordinary people. Commuters, contractors, tag users, a woman late for work, a man already on his second phone call of the morning. They arrived annoyed. They arrived anchored. They arrived exactly where they believed they were. That certainty felt obscene after a night like that. I went back into the booth and resumed the sequence with daylight traffic as if nothing had happened. Receipt, change, gate, receipt, change, gate. A maintenance crew found me there at 7:30 and asked why the central lane was active when the system had been scheduled for an automation test. I told them there had been control faults. One of them cursed the contractor for cheaping out on relay replacement. Another complained about the age of the cabinet. Their irritation was so ordinary I nearly laughed. That afternoon, Darlene met me at a diner west of town. She asked one question. "Did it hold?" "For one night." She nodded, like that was about as much as she had expected. I put the folded plat map from the surveyor on the table between us. "One of them gave me this." She opened it carefully. County boundary diagram, 1989. Several lines redrawn in pencil. Old crossings extended past where they should have ended. Drainage cuts marked like through roots. One location circled again and again in dark graphite. The Western Plaza. Darlene looked up. "They're orienting around the toll point." "What does that mean?" "It means the booth may be more stable to them than the roads themselves." I looked out the diner window at a gas station canopy and a man loading bottled water into the bed of his truck. "That's insane." "Yes." "You're very calm about that." "No," she said, "I'm practiced." Then she told me something Neil never had. Aubrey Fisk's last notes suggested he had come to believe some locations eventually required a human operator, not just to manage traffic, but to preserve the distinction between movement and spillover. Someone recognized by the system, someone who could keep the interaction smaller than the confusion. "You think that's me now?" I said. Darlene didn't answer immediately. That's what the evidence suggests. That's not a solution. No, it's conscription. Yes, we sat with that word between us. I wanted to be furious with her, with Neil, with Aubrey Fisk, with the county, with planners, engineers, surveyors, flood channels, storm detours, all the human systems that had cut and recut that land until something about movement there no longer ended cleanly. But rage needs a clear object. Systems like this don't give you one. For a while I kept moving through life anyway. Work, groceries, laundry, half-finished phone calls, a couple of half-hearted dates that never became second ones because I was too distracted, too tired, or too aware that I could never explain what my life actually felt like after midnight. I adapted the way people always do when they realize something will continue whether or not they deserve it. I no longer write notes. I no longer compare maps. I do not ask where they think they are, and I never answer when they ask what year it is. When old road names rise into my mind, I let them pass without speaking them aloud. That matters more than it should. You learn strange disciplines after enough years inside bad systems, not noble ones, structural ones. Which questions can be survived? Which kinds of curiosity act like hooks? Which words are safer left unsaid because speaking them seems to increase the pressure in the encounter? I turned down promotions because they involved access to incident databases. I avoided certain records buildings because the last time I walked into one, my phone rang in my pocket and played booth printer sounds into my ear. I see Neil once or twice a year. He took a county maintenance job far from toll operations and speaks about the road problem only when absolutely necessary. Darlene Fisk retired on paper, which changed nothing except how often people underestimated her access. Aaron sends me a Christmas card every year from whatever office park security job he moved into. He has never mentioned those 2 nights. Again, no one says the word haunting. No one says curse. No one says loop unless they are talking about lane sensors. We say outages. We say staffing. We say side lane faults. We say camera drift. We say control failure. We say occupancy errors. We say corridor history. This isn't denial. It's discipline. Some things grow when given the wrong language. A few months ago, I covered an overnight shift at a newer plaza outside New Braunfels. Bright LEDs, cleaner booth, better cameras, more automation. The sort of site private operators love because it looks efficient in presentations. There was no obvious reason for that place to feel touched by older roads. No visible link to the Western Corridor. No flood history I knew of. No washed-out crossings in living memory. If the problem were truly local, that booth should have been safe. At 2:17 a.m., the lane speaker clicked on by itself. No voice. Just the sound of distant traffic layered too deep for that road. Then, a familiar Ford LTD rolled into the lane with no headlights on. Dark blue, dull chrome. Pale man in a gray suit coat, both hands on the wheel. Richard Vaughn. He stopped and looked at me. For the first time since I had met him. He seemed less confused, not comfortable, not aware, just slightly more practiced, as if whatever the road was doing to him had grown used to repetition. "Is this the road to Del Rio?" he asked. Even after all those years, some stupid, honest part of me still wanted to answer. Instead, I said, "Toll is $3.25. He studied me. Then, very slightly, he smiled, not with pleasure, with relief. He placed the tarnished 1979 coin in the tray. I accepted it, raised the gate. He drove through. The cameras lost him at the edge of the light, exactly as they always did. The driver behind him was a woman in a late model crossover, She leaned toward her window and said, "That old car didn't have any taillights." I handed her receipt and said, "You're clear." She drove on, already half forgetting the question. That is another thing I've learned. The living are often eager to remain living in the useful sense. Given the chance to normalize what they saw, they will. Sometimes I envy them. Sometimes I think it's the only reason the roads still function at all. Because if everyone noticed what the lanes were really processing after midnight, nobody would keep them staffed. And if nobody kept them staffed, the wrong traffic would stop lining up. It would start spilling. That's the part I don't say out loud. Not to Neil, not to Darlene, not even in the privacy of my own apartment. Some nights, I think the booths don't protect the living from the dead. Some nights, I think they protect the map from grief, from unfinished returns, from interrupted errands, from the stubborn momentum of people who still believe the road should take them home because that is what roads are for. If you want a clean ending, I can't give you one. No priest, no buried object under the pavement, no engineer's report explaining the physics of broken routes, no final expedition into the dark with flares and survey equipment that maps the wrong geography clearly enough to make it stop. The world is uglier and more administrative than that. What I can give you is the rule I live by now. At the booth, keep the exchange smaller than the confusion. That's all. A rate, a nod, a receipt, a lifted arm. The smallest possible recognition that someone has arrived and may continue moving without forcing either of you to face the full wrongness of the encounter. It works often enough to matter. It does not work forever. Sometimes close to 2 a.m, I glance at the farthest monitor and see a silver Crown Victoria parked just beyond the floodlights, not entering, watching. Sometimes it is empty. Sometimes someone sits behind the wheel. Once, on a rainy overnight outside Seguin, the driver stepped out and stood at the edge of the light with one hand in his pocket, waiting. He looked enough like me that I refused to focus hard enough to confirm it. That has become one of my private rules. Do not verify what can still remain peripheral. I no longer think in terms of escape. That may sound tragic. It isn't exactly. Tragedy suggests a single irreversible fall. This is more like employment under impossible management. Some nights are ordinary. Some nights my biggest problem is a printer jam or a trucker arguing about posted rates. Some nights I go 6 hours without seeing anything wrong and let myself pretend the world is holding. And then a driver from the wrong year hands me exact change and asks whether the bridge is open. I take it. I lift the gate. I send them through. And sometimes, in the thin hour before dawn, I feel the lanes settle around me in a way I know too well now. Not relief, exactly, but alignment. As if for a little while, the place accepts the shape I'm giving it. That's the most dangerous part. Not the fear, not the impossible drivers. Being needed. Because once a system learns you are good for it, it stops needing to threaten you. It simply schedules you. If you ever pull up to a toll booth after midnight and the operator looks at you a beat too long before lifting the arm, don't ask what year it is. Don't ask whether the old road still goes through. Don't ask whether someone came by before you asking for a bridge, a crossing, or a town that isn't there anymore. Have your payment ready. Keep moving. And if, in your rearview mirror, you think you see headlights, following at the wrong distance on a road that should have ended miles ago, do yourself a favor. Do not turn around to verify them. Some things are easier to survive if you let them remain traffic.